Hi all, this is Allmighty and welcome to this video. So round 9 already, and this World Championship match is nothing short of extraordinary and very exciting, I would say. Anand versus Topalov, it is round 9 after round 8 and the result is 4-4. So Topalov managed to win that game and definitely put a little bit of a strain in Anand's plan to actually go and defend his title. And now we are up for a very exciting game because round 9 is actually the longest game of the match and I would say the most complicated one. But enough of me talking about it, let me just show you because it will be a while to actually go to the end of it. Here Anand is with white pieces and he starts with d4, the first move of the whole match. And we will see something different. So for the first time now, after Anand didn't manage to win in round 6 and in round 7, in game 6 and in game 7, he didn't manage to win with the white pieces. He decides to change from the Catalan into something new. So after c4, e6, knight to c3, we have the beloved Nimzo-Indian on the board. So not following Kramnik recipe for Topalov, he decides to go for something different. And let's see what happened. So we have the main line with e3, castles, bishop to d3 and c5. Of course, white doesn't want to capture because many of the players, including me, after captures like to play bishop to c3, pawn captures on c3, and then just look at this white pawns on the c file. Just keeping it there and even playing knight to c6 as the first move is quite relaxing, I should say, for black. So definitely, I do not recommend for white to actually go for this line. And of course, Anand doesn't go for it. He just continues with development as he should. Knight to f3, d5, striking in the center, castles, and now the exchanges. Pawn captures on d4, pawn captures on d4, pawn captures on c4, and bishop captures on c4. We do see a theme here, but I will get back to it later after we transition into the middle game. So after this, b6, of course, because of this pawn, it is not good to keep the bishop on c8 too long. You cannot develop it here, so the idea will be to develop it on b7. Bishop to g5, pinning the knight, bishop to b7, rook to e1, knight from b to d7, rook to c1, rook to c8, bishop to d3, and rook to e8. We could say that up until this point, that both of the players have finished their development. The last piece that needs to be developed is the queen. And what now? I just want to talk about the position for a little bit because this is a common setup in many of the games, in many of the variations. This is one of the most common setups and one of the things that probably you should learn as a beginner, if you are a beginner or an amateur, playing against the isolated pawn. This is something that Karpov liked to play against, and I very much like Karpov's style. So I'm very well versed in situations like these, and here with black pieces I would actually feel very comfortable. But this situation is actually a trade-off. You have a situation where white does have the isolated pawn, the material is equal, but black on the other hand does feel a little bit more cramped in. And you shouldn't be afraid of your situation here. You should cherish it and get to know it so that you can actually be the player who can play against the isolated pawn. With the less space on this side, black, as I've said, feels a little bit more cramped in, but in the end game, I would say that it isn't all that bad, because now the ideas for black, as for me personally, would be first to play h6, so bring in a little bit of a breathing space for the black king, and also make this bishop decide will he capture or not. If he doesn't, in the end you can play a6, b5 in order to expand on the queen side. This bishop shouldn't be, I mean, it can be, but in my opinion it shouldn't be traded for this knight. You're giving up the bishop pair and not really gaining a lot for it. I would bring the bishop back to e7, knight to b6, knight to c4, exploit this situation with a c4 square, and at the same time not allow white to actually push d5. But that is the general idea from my point of view of I would play with the black pieces, but you should keep in mind that white wouldn't stand idle. Bishop to b1 is of course a threat, with queen to d3 going for the h7, threats of checkmate, and so on and so forth. So a lot of ideas in this situation. I wanted to just stop here for a minute and talk about it, because here Topalov doesn't go for this. After queen to e2, he immediately captures on c3. And his idea is, after pawn captures on c3, to go maybe against this backward c pawn. And he ruined white's pawn structure, but he did give up the bishop pair. Queen to c7 and bishop to h4. Idea being knight to g5, knight to h5, knight to f4 is a threat, and knight to g5 first, so attacking this pawn. g6 stopping it, and once again Anand is the one who plays the novelty. He plays knight to h3, just stopping knight to f4 ideas. Previously we have seen queen to d2 played. So knight to h3 stopping it, and now e5, the best move in the position and the principled move. You want to open it up a little bit, exchange maybe the pawns on d4, and then once again go against the isolated pawn. But we saw that that isn't quite Topalov style. F3 played by Anand, and he is kind of inviting Topalov to actually capture on d4 so that he can sacrifice the queen for, not sacrifice, but exchange the queen for the two rooks. So that was of course a possibility, but first Topalov plays queen to d6, bishop to f2, and only now captures on d4. We have queen to e8, rook to e8, rook to e8, knight to f8, and pawn captures on d4. And in this point, now is where actually, the things get rolling, because you have a situation in a world championship match where you have 3 pieces on the board and 2 rooks for a queen, a very complicated position where you cannot say exactly which player is better. Of course, I would say that this position is kind of equal, because neither of the players do have some threats against the other, and what is left is just to play on. And that's what they do. First, knight to f6 by Topalov, attacking the rook. Rook comes back to e1, and now knight to e6. Black pieces look very developed and very nice situated. Bishop to c4, attacking this bishop, and now bishop to d5. A very good move, but it runs into bishop to g3. Queen to b4, now two pieces attacking the c4 bishop, but now bishop to e5. And this is the first critical moment, because here you have to make a decision actually. Do you want to capture on c4 and allow bishop to f6, making this bishop, dark square bishop, a master of the dark squares in front of your king? Do you really want to do it? I wouldn't say that I know a lot of players that would actually allow it. So also Topalov doesn't allow it either. He would rather not go for this, but play knight to d7. And knight to d7 is a very good move. And here bishop to d5 was possible, but actually Anand wanted to play one other move first, which is a3, and you will see the difference. So here, if you capture on a3, you lose a lot of ideas of queen captures on d4, but I will come to this immediately, because here queen to a4 was played, and only now bishop captures on d5. Knight captures on e5, and now you see the importance of this queen here, because if the queen was on a3, then ideas like queen to d4 wouldn't be possible. So here, if rook captures on e5, queen to d4 wouldn't be possible, picking up the rook. Pretty much the same idea if pawn captures on e5, queen to d4, and picking up the bishop. So this is why you should play queen to a4, but not queen to a3. Here, after knight to e5, bishop to e6 was played, and now if queen would have been on b4, then knight to d3 would be a much better move, because then with the queen on b4, the double attack on the e1 rook would be much greater. So that was the kind of the idea of the queen to b4 move. Of course, also the attacking of the d4 pawn. But here, instead of that, not going for that idea, Topalov went for queen captures on d4 immediately. King to h1, and now pawn captures on e6. And the difference here is that with the knight on d3 and not actually capturing on e6, black would have had this pawn here or not. Actually, okay, let me just show you the situation. Instead of capturing on d4, knight to d3, you have this bishop to f7, and then black needs to go on g7, because after king captures here, you have rook to c7 check, king goes back to g8, and then this rook can come can actually move away, and black can just continue with the game. So that would have been a possibility, and black didn't want to go for this. So instead of that, instead of all of this, he played queen to d4, kind of simplifying the position. King to h1, pawn captures on e6, but this allows knight to g5, and that is the whole idea, the whole problem, I would say. Here, you cannot play knight to d3, because rook to c8 check, king can only go to g7, and knight to e6, a little bit of a nice tactic. Something that we've seen previously in the game between Maxim Vashirov and Nico Georgiadis in Bill Chess Festival in 2018. Pretty much the same idea of giving a check, not allowing the king to move anywhere but on g7, and then knight to e6 forks the king, and I think there was a rook. So a pretty common tactic. Of course, Topalov doesn't miss it, and he plays queen to d6. Knight to e4, centralizing of the knight on a very nice square and threatening things like knight to f6, but we have queen to a3. And you can see the position is still complicated. We are only on move 33, and so many options and so many things you can do. Both of the players are very low on time, and you could definitely see that both of the players could have gone into some mistakes, which essentially happened, and they didn't find the best way how to continue and maybe even win the game. Rook to c3, first attacking the queen, a nice move. Queen to b2, and now h4. Always a good move, keep the breathing space for the king open. b5, and this was actually the first mistake that Topalov really made that could have decided the game, because now rook to c8 check, king to g7, rook to c7 check, king to f8, and here the same thing would happen instead of king to g8. Knight to g5 was played, but rook to d1 was a better move, because puts the rook on the open file, and black is forced to actually play a rook to d3, knight to d3. And why knight to d3? Because if rook captures, queen to b1, check, pick up the rook. You can also give a check on a1, king to h2, and after queen to e5, pick up the rook on c7. But the main idea is that you cannot capture the knight, and what you need to do, you have to play something like go for the pawns. When knight was on e5, it wasn't possible to actually go for rook to h7, because knight to f7 was a threat, just locking in the rook on this side of the board. So here you can actually capture either on h7 or on a7. For example, if you capture on a7, now black still has to think about how to approach this position. Queen to d4 attacking the rook, rook captures on h7, and b4, pushing the pawn. Rook to b7 keeps an eye on the pawn, and as you can see, white is much better here. Now he can actually include also the knight into the game, or even when he is able, he can put the rook on the open file and then threats of checkmate on the back rank. But okay, instead of that, after king to f8, we saw knight to g5, which is also an okay move, because threats to capture on e6, threats to capture on h7 with the knight as well. So black has to deal with it, and we see king to e8, which is a good move, and now rook captures on h7. Queen to c3, and as I said, players were in time trouble, and here was the moment where Anand should have found the winning move, which once again is, sorry, not rook to d1, but rook to e2. And why rook to e2? Because here, as you can see, queen to c3 was played to attack the rook and at the same time defend the knight. But now with rook to e2, you are putting the rook on the light square, and the black queen cannot attack the rook on the light square and at the same time keep an eye on the knight, which is on the dark square. If you want to move the knight, then you see rook to e6 is coming, rook to e7, and then once again threats of checkmate on the back rank. Whatever black plays at this moment, it wouldn't be a good move. And if we, for example, choose a variation like pushing the pawn to b4, knight could capture on e6, b3, king to h2, moving the king on from the first rank, b2, and he is in time to play rook to b7 to actually not allow this pawn being promoted. Queen to c8, knight to g7 check, king to f8, rook captures on b2, and white is winning this position. Rook to b8 will be the next move. So that was a possibility, but after queen to c3, Anand, eager to reach time control, he plays rook to h8 and allows Topalov to run away with the king from the 8th rank. King to d7, rook to h7, and now king to c6. Rook to e4, centralizing the rook, defending the pawn on h4, so that now this rook can actually come on this side of the board, and we see b4. So once again, now Topalov is the one who can also make some threats, so he pushes the passed pawn. Knight to e6 captures, and king to b6 defends the pawn on a7. We have knight to f4, threatening knight d5 check, and forks the queen. Queen to a1 check first. King to h2, and now a5. So pushes the pawn, which will support this other pawn. But this, once again, is a blunder because allows h5. And h5 is a great move in this position because it opens up the position. As you can see, now that these pawns are pushed, once again, the king finds himself in a situation where he is on the other side of the board, and he cannot go in some corner, in some hole, where he can actually go out with the checks to defend himself with the pawns. So here, black needs to capture. Rook captures on h5, and now the knight is attacked twice. Knight to c6, and knight to d5, and actually at this moment, here, you could see already that black, is in not the best of situations. If he goes on this side of the board, then knight to b4 comes with a check. And if he goes on the other side of the board, there is a very high probability that he will lose the knight. So king to b7 first, rook to h7 check, king to a6, and now rook to e6 pins the knight. King has to go to b5, and now rook to h5, once again threats of discoveries. And what will you do? Here you have two options, knight to d8 or knight to d4. Either way, it doesn't look good for you. Knight to d4 was played by Topalov. First knight to b6 check, so not allowing the king to go on this side of the board but go back. King goes to a6, and now rook to d6, attacking the knight and at the same time keeping possibilities of discoveries. King to b7, moving out of the way. You cannot capture because the queen is defending the knight, and now knight to c4 was played. And that was actually a blunder because here, this was the next move that was played, but here knight to d5 was possible. And the thing with knight to d5 is that now the king cannot come on c7 and give a check, but rather rook to d7 is a threat with rook to h8 checkmate. So you have to play something like knight to c6, and after that rook to h7 check, king goes to a6, and now you can actually capture the knight. If you don't play knight to c6, for example, if you play, I don't know, after queen to b1 stopping rook to h7, and then rook from h to h6, and then the rooks are connected, and once again threats of checks and checkmate are soon to follow. Knight to f3 check, pawn captures, queen to c2, king to g3, and there are no more checks, and white can just continue with his attack. So that was a possibility, but once again Anand misses an opportunity to go for a win. He plays knight to c4, and Topalov, knowing that he will lose the knight, he just simply sacrifices it for the pawn. At least he wins a pawn. So knight captures, pawn captures, and queen to a2. So he is not losing a knight because he has this knight to d2 move, and now king to c7 attacking the rook. Rook from h to d5, and here we saw b3. And at this moment, once again, this is move 57, and Anand is in time trouble. So he makes a couple of moves to reach time control. Rook to d7 check, king c8, rook to d8 check, king c7, rook to d8, from a to d7 check, king to c8, and now this was move 60. Now he has time to actually think about the position, and he should have played rook to a7, but he played rook to g7. But okay, not all is lost. After rook to g7, we saw a4, and actually, once again, in this position, he was given an opportunity to go and win the game. He could have done it with rook from d to d7, and now, as you can see, the doubled rooks on the 7th rank, the knight on d1, which is eyeing the b1 promoting square, giving a couple of checks, playing king to g3, and then threatening to give a checkmate with either of the rooks would be sufficient to actually go about this game. For example, if b2, you give a check, king to d8, and then the other rook comes here. King to e8, rook to h7, and now you can see rook to c8 and rook to h8 are threats. King to d8, rook to a7, and how will you stop rook to a8 and rook to h8? You have to give up the queen, for example, queen to e6, and then it's quite easy to actually win this game. So that was one possibility. Instead of sorry, and if instead of after rook from d to d7 you play a3, so to keep an eye on this knight, king to g3 is played. So now if the queen captures on d2, it isn't with check. You play, for example, queen to a1, but still, rook c7, rook b7, king c8, knight captures on b3, you're losing this pawn, and yeah, with the two rooks and the knight, it is quite easily winning game. But okay, after a4, Anand once again misses the opportunity. He plays rook to c5, king to b8, and rook back to d5. But now king to c8, okay, he is once again in this situation, but he doesn't play rook to d7, he plays king to g3. But now it's a little bit too early. Queen to a1 attacks the rook, rook comes to g4, and now b2. How will you stop b1 being promoted to a queen? You cannot play something like a rook to b5 because of queen to e1 check, and you lose the knight. I mean, it would lead to a draw, but I'm just saying that there is actually no good way how to defend it. So rook to c4 was played by Anand, king to b7, and now king to f2. b1 queen, knight captures, queen captures, and not just that, but also you cannot capture the pawn, because after rook captures, queen to c2 check, you lose the rook. So it would be definitely not the best of situations for Anand. Instead of capturing on a4, he plays a rook from d to d4. And now it's easily a drawn position for Topalov, because he cannot go and push this pawn to a promotion, because there will definitely be a perpetual. First we see queen to a2 check, king goes to g3 and a3. But okay, I will show you the moves how it actually proceeded, and I will explain to you why didn't he actually, Anand still had a chance to actually win this game and finish up this video, because yeah, it's taking a while. Rook to c3, attacking the pawn, and queen to a1. Rook to b4 check, king to e6, you cannot capture and give checkmate, but rook to a4, king to b5, and after rook captures, now here comes the checks. Queen to g1, and you will see that whatever white does, wherever he goes, he cannot move, for example, this rook to block, because the king will capture on a4. And also he won't be able to block with the other rook, because Topalov would give a check to actually go and capture this other rook. And we will see a couple 5 or 6 moves, black just giving checks, queen c2, king e3, queen c1, and after those couple of moves, several moves, it was in this position on move 83 that they agreed for a draw. So quite an exciting, exhausting, and complicated game for both of the players. After Anand analyzed the game, probably thought, yeah, he missed a lot of chances, and now the question is, they're going into round 10, Topalov is with white pieces. Will Anand actually break under psychological pressure, because having so many opportunities to actually go once again in the lead after losing the game in round 8, or will he show character and actually just plainly show that he is a better player and then defend the title of the world champion? Many things to discuss and many things to discover. I'm very grateful that I managed to survive until the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed it, yeah, looking forward to around 10, 11 and 12. That being said, I would like to thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.